Well, you could blame it on the end of winter. You could blame it on the sudden warmth. You could blame it on the welcome sight of buds on the trees. You could blame it on a dash of young love, but most of all, blame it on a serious case of stupidity. She and I were in college. We'd gone out on a date or two and felt a spark or two. Spring was in the air. The gray sky had finally shed her winter coat. The sky was blue. The breeze was warm. We drove with the windows down and our hearts in good spirits and our spirits high. I don't recall if that Sunday afternoon drive was spontaneous or planned. What I do recall are the fields of winter wheat. So lush, so green, so inviting. I'm sure the romp was my idea. I'm a bit prone to impromptu folly. I recall once trying to impress a girl by taking a plunge into the river, only to discover that the water was only 3 feet deep. I'm so glad I did not dive. I was up to my ankles in mud. But back to the wheat field. Did I mention its beauty? Olive green carpet it was. And did I mention that romance was beginning to bud? She for me, I for her. And so when I suggested a barefoot scamper through the field, I guess I was thinking kind of hand in hand, skip and jump, giggle and chuckle, and who knows, maybe a first kiss. So I stopped the car. We took off our shoes. We peeled off our socks. We jumped over the fence, expecting to land on the equivalent of a soft mattress. But alas, we had been duped. Winter wheat fields, I came to learn the hard way, are green on the surface, but rocky and sticky beneath. We took 3 or 4 strides and we came to a sudden stop, and she gave me a glare. She gave me a look that said, "What were you thinking?" And by the time we retraced our steps, my ego was as bruised as our feet. That was the beginning of the end for us. That was the day that love died in a wheat field in West Texas. Sounds like a country western song, doesn't it? You've made the same mistake. Not on a farm, but in life. You've been fooled, you've been deceived, you've been tricked, you've been lured into a field of green only to realize it's a bed of thorns. Remember how the bright lights led to lonely nights? Remember that time that the promise of fast cash led to dead-end debt? Remember the time that he lured you into his bed, or she promised you her love? You didn't bloody your feet, but you broke your heart or drained your bank account. And hopefully you learned this lesson. Things aren't always the way they seem. What's too good to be true usually is. That's a word to the wise. And that's the message of Esther chapter 1. We continue a study through this delightful and insightful Old Testament book this weekend. And you might recall, if you were a part of our first conversation, that the original purpose of this book was to be read by Jewish exiles at a feast, an annual holiday called Purim, P-U-R-I-M. To this day, in some Jewish communities, it's the biggest party of the year. It's a happy holiday. People hiss and holler at the appropriate moments as if on cue. They boo at the sound of the name Haman. They applaud at the entrance of Esther. They chuckle at the presence of Xerxes, and they celebrate the decision and the courage of Mordecai. Most of all, they walk away reminded, don't be duped by the winter wheat. Don't be lured by the bright lights of Persia. Stay faithful to your covenant, and stay faithful to your call as a covenant people. Maybe it'd be good to back away for just a moment. Do you have time for about 4 paragraphs of history? This is a super short version of Hebrew history. You'll recall that when God called Abraham out of Ur, he called him to be the father of a holy nation. He gave this promise: I will bless those who bless you. I will place a curse on those who harm you, and all the people of the end of the earth will be blessed through you. That blessing, that universal global blessing, came in the form of Jesus Christ himself, a descendant of Abraham. The children of Abraham were to be curators and caretakers of this covenant, of this seed. For this reason, they were to remain distinct in the world. Not odd, not curious, but just distinct. They had a unique call upon them. They were not permitted to marry non-Jews, for example. They were forbidden to worship pagan deities. They were told never to embrace the pagan culture. They had unique to them ways to live, to love, and to worship. Now, did they succeed? Well, sometimes marvelously so. Think about Joshua and the children of Israel as they move into the promised land. Sometimes miserably, no. Think about the kings, one more evil than the one prior, each one succeeding and out-sinning the other. In fact, there was a time in which they had so wandered away from their original call that God disciplined them. He disciplined them through a season of exile to get their attention. 598 BC was the year that the Babylonians began their sacking of Jerusalem, inaugurating what eventually would be a forced deportation of citizens into Babylonian captivity. 539 BC, the Persians sacked the Babylonians. And so by the time we meet Mordecai, Esther, Xerxes, and Haman in 5th century BC, the Jewish citizens were 3 generations removed from their homeland. 3 generations removed. Odds are they had no one who could remember their life in Jerusalem. Most of them, maybe all of them, had spent their lives encircled by Persians. They did business with non-Jews. They lived amidst the opulent wealth of the foreign people. They lived surrounded by these fragrant, extravagant temples. What's more, the truly dedicated among them had taken one of 2 opportunities to return to Jerusalem. First under the leadership of Zerubbabel, another under the leadership of Ezra. So the Jews who remained in Persia during the events that we're studying in the book of Esther, these had chosen to remain in Persia. Life was good to them. Exile had been kind to them. They had good jobs. They had friends who were Persians, but friends nonetheless. They had positions. Some were more Persian than they were Hebrew, and they needed to be reminded. This is not your home. This is not your home. You are exiles here. And I'm wondering, do we need the same reminder? Do we need to be reminded that we are only visitors here? that we too, as followers of Christ, we are exiles. I ask you, do you align with Jesus Christ? If so, then your eternal citizenship is not the one that's printed on your passport. Do you adhere to the message of grace through faith? If so, then please underline this admonition from your master. You do not belong to the world, but I have chosen you out of the world. You're in the world, but you're not of the world. This world is not our home. We're subjects of a different king. We heed a higher law. We follow a greater good. We set our sights on a life after this. But sometimes we, like the Jews in 5th century Persia, sometimes we need a reminder. For them, Jerusalem was so far away. It was so distant in their past. It was just pictures in a scrapbook. And in Persia, well, Persia was so relevant. I mean, so real, so cutting edge, so with it. It was like a gigantic wheat field. Now, the author didn't use my metaphor, but I like to think he would have appreciated it. Because the point of the first chapter is simply this: don't jump the fence. Here's how the book begins. First of all, Xerxes shows off. Xerxes shows off. In the 3rd year of his reign, Xerxes, remember he's the king, he gave a banquet for all his nobles and officials. The military leaders of Persia and Media, the princes and the nobles of the provinces were present. Now, Xerxes was 32 years of age at this point. He was rich beyond imagination. And the excuse for this lavish event was to convince nobles, to convince officials, to convince princes, to convince governors and military leaders to support his campaign against the Greeks. He promised wealth and rewards to the willing warriors, and to convince them that he could make good on his promise, he staged this 6-month Las Vegas extravaganza. For a full 180 days, he displayed the vast wealth of his kingdom and the splendor of his glory and his majesty. Can you imagine? His palace was astounding. His palace was comprised of white and blue linen and couches of gold on a mosaic pavement of porphyry, marble, and mother of pearl and other costly stones. Wine flowed like water. Everyone drank as much as they desired, then they drank some more. 6 months of fine food, who's who and Pinot Noir, pillars of marble and couches of silver. Even the mosaic pavements were top-notch. But early in this story, the true colors of Xerxes began to appear. Turns out, for all his strut and his swagger, he was nothing more than a misogynist wimp. Did you read this story in chapter 1 of the book of Esther? When he was, according to verse 10, in high spirits from the wine, in other words, when he was drunk, he sent for his queen. While tipsy, he decided to show off his trophy wife. Why? Because she was lovely to look at. Think Kim Kardashian of Susa. He expected her to walk in, bow to his wishes, but much to his surprise and much to his chagrin, she refused to come. It would be helpful for me to make this point. Persia was not a safe place to be a woman, not a safe place to be a female. Females, including the queen, were property. The way rabbis tell this story, in their writings, Xerxes told her to enter the room wearing nothing but a crown. Whether that's true or not, we do not know, but we do know he did not invite Vashti to come in to meet with the men in the group in his party so they could ask her opinions. He wanted her to entertain the guys in his man cave. She refused. She refused. Prance about in front of a bunch of drinking guys? No way. And when she refused, look at this. The king became furious and he burned with anger. A chuckle is permitted right here. The irony of it all. Big, strong Xerxes, ruler of 127 provinces, mighty overlord who controlled the world, was undone by his wife. He was so taken aback, he had to have a committee meeting with the guys. He assembled his 7 advisors, and he said, what am I supposed to do? Well, they huddled, they strategized. You're not going to believe this report. They said, Queen Vashti has done wrong, not only against the king, but also against all the nobles and the peoples of all the provinces of King Xerxes. For the queen's conduct will become known to all the women, so they will despise their husbands and say, King Xerxes commanded Queen Vashti to come before him, but she would not come. I smell fear in those words. Don't you? These barely sober men worried about this precedent set by Queen Vashti. Something had to be done. If not, the world might spin off its axis. For crying out loud, women will begin thinking for themselves. Men will need to be kind to their wives. Daughters will envision a life outside of the kitchen. How to avoid such a tragedy? Well, here's what we do. We make an example out of Vashti. Let it be written in the laws of Persia and Media, which cannot be repealed, that Vashti is never again to enter the presence of King Xerxes. Also, let the king give her royal position to someone who is better than she. Then, when all the king's edict is proclaimed throughout his vast realm, all the women will respect their husbands, from the least to the greatest. On what planet were these men born? Who had spiked their wine with silly juice? Were they really so blind, so arrogant, so out of touch with human nature that they thought an edict would engender the devotion of a gender? And were these really the men in charge of running the world, the largest nation in the world? They're just a bunch of locker room thugs. That's who they are. Press the pause button for just a moment on the story. Do you shake your head at the folly? Does the response cause you to roll your eyes in disgust? If so, the mission of the author is accomplished. He's sending a message here. Don't be fooled by parties of power of Persia. Don't be swayed by glitz in Hollywood or boast on the Beltway or the clout of the corner office. Here's the truth. The truth is this: the emperor's got no clothes. You know the story, right? From Hans Christian Andersen. It's a classic. A king was obsessed with his wardrobe, changed clothes every hour. Some clever charlatan saw an opportunity to make a buck off his indulgence. And so they told him about their special brand. Clothing so special that only the sophisticated could see it. The simpletons of society would see nothing. Well, thrilled at the prospect of having a wardrobe that would reveal and impress only the truly wise, the king commissioned their work. They set up their looms and they began to weave their special thread. Curious for a report, the king sent a religious leader to bring back a report to examine their craft. The pastor went in, but he saw nothing. He saw nothing on the looms. He saw them working, but he saw nothing. But knowing that the thread was unseen in the eyes of the simple-minded, he couldn't bear the thought of telling the king he couldn't see anything. So he lied to the king. He told him the king was about to receive some glorious clothing. Sometime later, the king sent a nobleman. Like the pastor, the nobleman saw nothing. And like the pastor, the man couldn't abide the thought of being inferior, so he also lied to the king lest he appear unwise. Word spread throughout the realm that the king would soon appear in clothing that only the sophisticated people could see. When the crooked tailors showed up to dress him, the king saw no pants. He saw no robe. He saw no vest. But he dared not admit that he couldn't see it. I mean, he has to be sophisticated, right? So he allowed himself to be dressed in clothing that did not exist. And when His Highness stepped out to be seen, His Highness was in full view. The people, equally duped, dared not admit that they saw no clothing. They oohed, they awed. It took a child to declare the naked truth. The emperor has no clothes, shouted the kid. Now, the story of the bear derriere and the story of the insolent Xerxes posit the same question. What if all the glitz and glamour in the world is nothing more than a hoax? What if all those people posting pictures on Instagram and Facebook? What if all the red carpet and the big parties? What if the shiny toys? What if all the hoop-de-doo and the la-di-da is actually one big field of winter wheat? Friend, don't romp in it. Don't fall for it. Don't buy the line. Don't take the bait. Don't take the bluff. Don't get cozy in Persia. You see, we are now the covenant people. We who serve as the temple of the Holy Spirit. We who have been bought by the blood of Christ. We are now the curators and the caretakers of the great covenant of Jesus Christ. That's our job. And our job is not to blend in. Our job is to stand up, to stand out. Not to be odd, but to be distinct. Back in my Boy Scout days, I earned a merit badge. First aid, it was called. And it qualified me to be able to wrap ankles and repair skinned knees. That's about it. But it also qualified me to have a particular role at the Boy Scout Jamboree. I could be one of the Boy Scouts in the first aid tent. I got a wrap that went around my bicep that had a little red cross on it. I was pretty impressed with myself. And I stood in the front of the tent, and over the top of the tent there was a flag that also had some type of symbol indicating here's where you come if you got hurt. Again, we couldn't do much for people, but we could do a bit. But you know, as I and the others were in the tent, we watched all the other Boy Scouts getting to play. They were competing, they were swimming, they were running, they were jumping, and I didn't like not being a part of them. And I was about to take off my band and abandon the flag when a particular Boy Scout leader reminded me, you're not like them now. You're here to help them. You need to stand out, because when someone gets hurt, they're going to need you. So I kept my post. Will you keep yours? Please, will you keep yours? Don't blend in. Stand out. Right now, our society has seen a spike in calls to emotional helplines and hotlines of 891% over this time last year. Divorces are up. Breakups are up. Loneliness is spiking. Depression is high. And worst of all, the suicide rate is higher than it's been any time since World War II. This is not the time for you to play in Persia. This is the time for you to be distinct, to be a curator, to be a caretaker of the covenant of God. In case you don't know this, however, let me tell you, there is a devil, a prince of Persia, if you will, who's trying to convince you to compromise, who's trying to and convince you to forget who you are. And he's lying to you. And he's telling you that you don't matter and you can't make a difference. Don't you listen to him. You remember the word of Jesus Christ, who calls you to be in the world but not to be a part of the world. Be alert to the lies of the devil. Need some samples of his seduction? Here's a few. You believe in a good God. Prince of Persia tells you to believe in no God. You believe in a right and wrong. Society says there's nothing wrong. You believe in the cross of Christ. Persia curses the name of Christ. You believe in life after death. The devil wants you to believe in just living a good life before death. You believe we're saved by grace. There's a lie that says we don't even need saving. You believe that your body is God's holy temple. Society's trying to tell you that your body is just your plaything. You believe in a covenant marriage. Society believes in convenient marriages. And the list just goes on and on and on and on. But the big point, you are a chosen people, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, God's special possession. Why? That you may declare the praises of him who called you out of darkness into his wonderful light. Once you were not a people, now you are the people of God. Once you had not received mercy, now you have received mercy. Dear friends, I urge you, as foreigners and exiles, to abstain from sinful desires which wage war against your soul. Live such good lives among the pagans that, though they accuse you of doing wrong, they may see your